Week 4. Hi, everybody. It's week 4. Gertrude Stein. Erica Kaufman says that this is her favorite week. I think it's the favorite week for a bunch of us. We're going to explore that. And we have some dear friends here today. And I'll point them out in a few minutes. But a very special guest coming all the way from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, is Sharon Ingram, who's a long time. Yes, and there's even applause in the room. Sharon Ingram, you know her as S.E. Ingram, a longtime ModPoer and a community TA who's on a ModPo tour. She and her husband have been traveling. They went to Washington, D.C. to hang out with the ModPovians down there. Yeah, and that was fun. You did a little one of their meetups. And then we went to New York last week, and she was there, and now she's here. This is the final loop, and we're so pleased, Sharon, that you're here. And we have Anna Strong on the phones. Hello, Anna Strong. Say hello. You have a mic.
Hello, everybody.
Yes. And here at the table, we have Carlos. Hello, Carlos.
Hey, everyone. Good to be back.
Yep. And here's Lily to my right.
Hello.
And Lily's also going to be looking at Twitter. To my immediate left, the amazing Julia Block. Hello, Julia.
Hello.
And you're also looking at Twitter and the discussion forums.
I am.
And in Google Hangouts, we have Dave Poplar coming to us from Massachusetts, and he is also going to be looking at the forums to see if he can pick up some fun questions. And we have Erica Kaufman, who is in her office at Bard College. Hello, Erica.
Hi, Al.
Dr. Kaufman. Yes.
Indeed.
I think snaps all around the world for a newly minted PhD, Dr. Erica Kaufman, who has been a professor in our hearts for many years, but is now one kind of like the last scene in The Wizard of Oz. Somebody had a bag, they pulled out a diploma, and they gave it to you. And now you are what you already knew you were. You could have clicked your heels 3 times just to mix the conceit and been a professor all along. But you're not in Kansas. You're at Bard, and there's a big difference.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really very exciting. Congratulations. Max McKenna in Chicago. Hello, Max.
Hey, Al.
And hello, Max. And Molly O'Neill, and it's only 9:05 out there in Los Angeles.
That's right. Good morning.
Good morning to you all. Good morning to everybody who's listening live, watching live, and good morning to, well, good something to everybody who's watching us as a recording. A kind and glass and a cousin, a spectacle and nothing strange, a single hurt color, and an arrangement in a system to pointing. All this and not ordinary, I'll say. All this and not ordinary. Not unordered in not resembling. The difference is spreading. Oh, so much of that crucial tender button has become anthemic, has become thematic for ModPo, and I hope in the next hour and 10 minutes we'll get a chance to talk about some of those phrases, but I want to start before we take our first phone call at 215-573-9752, 215-573-9752, and take our comments in the discussion forums at the special sub-forum, which is called 10615 Webcast. So just click on the left side on discussion forums and then find the Webcast discussion subforum and then the sub-subforum and join us there. Or at Twitter using the hashtag ModPoLive or ModOlive. Or call 215-573-9752. Before we do that, I'd like to go around and get everybody to say the briefest little maybe helpful, maybe not helpful thing about any of the following phrases. Arrangement in a system to pointing, that's one thing you could say. All this and not ordinary, that's another thing you can comment on. Not unordered in not resembling, love that. Or the difference is spreading, and we'll start with Dave Poplar. Say anything about any of those phrases, anything at all, Dave Poplar from Massachusetts.
Then, what did she say? What was the second to last one? Not unordinary?
Not unordered in not resembling.
Yeah, I think that's important because I think what she seems to be doing is going for more resemblance than representation.
Yeah, and when words resemble rather than represent, what are they freed to do, Dave Poplar?
Well, then you can just break down the connotation. I mean, she's sort of saying, yeah, the denotation is there. We can deal with that, but that's really not descriptive. Like I want to deal with all the connotation that exists out there.
What a radical you are, saying that denotation is not descriptive. I guess we would say to people who are apprentices to Stein or novices or first-timers that description is just one of 6 or 7 or 10 ways of resembling words to thing or words to words. Okay, let's go on. Erica Kaufman, say one thing about any of those phrases.
All this and not ordinary is, I think, a great way to think about Gertrude Stein's continuous present, meaning that the way that she works with language is all-encompassing, but her grammar and her syntax changes the ordinary into things that are so wonderfully not ordinary.
Really brilliantly put. Really great. I hope everybody will rewind when you watch the recording and listen to Erica say that 6 times. And that would pretty much be it. We could wrap up and go get lunch, because that's totally amazing. I mean, it seems to me that we want language to function in an ordinary way, which is another way of saying use the convention so we can communicate stuff that we have to communicate, such as get out of the way of that bus, or what time is it? Look at the clock and tell me what time it is. But non-ordinary language is how language gives us pleasure, how language does more than just do the basic utility. So non-utilitarian language is something we should think about, especially in the realm of art. Why get into the realm of art and then use ordinary? Okay, thank you so much. Max, quickie on any of these?
I always loved an arrangement and a system to pointing. It's just, that's probably one of the most metafictional lines, or sorry, metapoetic lines in that poem. It's this idea of the poem not as a sort of continuous, stable utterance, or sort of by a speaking subject or something, but rather it's the idea of a poem as system, as assemblage, as something that's pointing to something that has many different parts. It's a good way, I think, of thinking of Stein in general.
It really is. A synonym for arrangement, you've already done it, but can you do another?
In addition to assemblage?
Yep.
Tableau.
Tableau, meaning things in a scene that are juxtaposed.
Yes.
That's cool. Thank you. Molly O'Neill, good morning. Any thought to add to any of this?
I'm always happy to come back to the differences spreading, because it feels either really ominous or really exciting, and it signals something to think about, whether Stein herself is the difference and now we're disseminating her, or whether spreading itself is the difference and picking apart the language. So it's a nice starting off point.
I think detractors of Stein who actually use sci-fi, terroristic, that's the wrong word, fear-mongering terms, like she's going to infect. Reviewers in the 1930s said she's going to infect the language and ruin it. They really thought of her as a kind of germ spreader, a bad representation. And it makes you think that it's like the invasion of the body snatchers. If you're really scared of what this is going to do, the difference is spreading. But the upside of that is this becomes a kind of rallying cry for a wider use of language. Carlos, hey, good morning.
Hey.
You're relatively new to Stein. What do you think of any of this?
Yeah, I could maybe talk about the come back to not unordered and not resembling.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I am new to Stein. This is the first I've read of her. But I sort of read that line as a metapoetic line, sort of talking about her rhetoric or way of writing about things that maybe perhaps, to somebody like me reading it at first, it doesn't seem like she's writing about the thing that she is writing about.
Mm.
But her way of speaking, her way of drawing this picture or writing this picture of the thing or getting at the nature of the thing is not unordered, and it's not resembling of the thing in the way that it differs from the actual thing or the way that we're used to reading about the object.
That's really well put. And if it's not resembling, then it's not unordered. I mean, one of the criticisms of Stein would be it's all out of order. She's saying, no, it's not unordered. In not resembling, it's not unordered. That's a totally new approach. Lily, your thought on any of this?
Well, this is the first button in the book, correct?
I think it is, yeah.
Isn't it? So I always think of it as, even if it's not, I always think of it as a lens through which to read the rest of the book, especially because it's a glass, so it's kind of a literal lens, but also the idea of arrangement, going off what you and Carlos were just saying, arrangement not unordered and difference spreading seem to me to say, like, Stein's coming out at the beginning saying, you know, you're going to read this and think it's the opposite of all these things, but it is a composition. And actually, Mandana and I were just talking about this in my office hours this morning. It might have the effect of being random sentences sort of thrown together in a bag, like Tristan Zara style, but she's emphasizing, like, it's not. This was very much my work, me behind it, arranging things intentionally.
Yeah, great. Julia, quick thought on any of this?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on what Lily just said and just add that to say that something is not unordered in not resembling also suggests that there's form in everything. So I think one of the things Stein teaches us to do is recognize patterns where we think there are none. So seeing patterns and order in what seems to be chaos, both because that's what she's telling us. Lily just described it as intention, a kind of intention, but also recognizing patterns in language where we think there might be none.
That was great. Anna Strong, add something to this and then smoothly transition to our first phone caller. Anna Strong?
Let's see if I can figure out how to do all of those things at once. Yeah, I think that might, well, that's a lie. Let Us Describe is my favorite poem this week, but I also love A Carafe That Is a Blind Glass. And I guess I want to get back to the difference is spreading, because I love the idea that, you know, we kind of get to this point in the course where we've been watching ourselves do all this close reading and do all this kind of associative work to kind of get at what a word might mean. And that just like kind of reaches a sort of like critical mass in Stein, that so much of the work that goes into reading Stein is actually the work of just thinking about language and signification, and how open it can actually be when you start to dig into what a particular word could actually mean.
Signification can be open after all those years of being told that the best way to proceed in life is to have a relatively more or less narrow way of signifying so that people can understand you. Suddenly we're faced with the openness, which allows more possibilities and makes things complicated but also more nuanced. While you're getting ready to pick up the phone, I just want to mention a few people in the room and invite somebody to come up here to the table. We have, it's Michael, who's drawing as usual, sitting in the first row. We have CJ here. Welcome back, CJ. We have Sharon, as I mentioned, who's visiting from Canada. We have Andrea. Hello, Andrea. We have Mary. And, of course, Jason, who's arrived and has the portable mic, so he's going to be able to help us out with audience. And I met you on the street yesterday. You came up to me. Yes, and I was on the phone, and I thought, who is going to interrupt me while I'm on the phone except the ModPo person? No, I meant that as a positive. You had urgently to connect with me. I was like, oh, I know you. You're from the video. You're a ModPo guy. So anyway, what's your name?
I'm Rachel. I live down the street, and I'm thinking of applying to Canada next year.
Okay. So here's Rachel. So I'm going to ask Mary to come up to the table, if you don't mind, while we're talking to the person on the phone. And Anna, who's on the phone?
The person calling is actually the Baroness Elsa von Freitag-Lorenhoven.
Oh, the Baroness has come back.
So we're going to talk to the Baroness.
Seriously, this person is going to be the Baroness?
Greetings, Madam Baroness.
Okay. Hello, Baroness.
Oh, hello, Al, darling. That Anna certainly knows her onions.
Wait a minute. Is this the Baroness putting on a British accent? The Baroness had a German accent.
Well, we can only do so much with what we have been given. And
following classic movie rules that anyone of a non-American background speaks in a British accent when they speak English.
It's true. It's 12 martinis.
I must confess, Anna did put me on hold for quite a long time, and I was only up to number 4 when I originally called, but by now I am on number 8. And I'm sorry.
Elsa, may I call you Elsa?
No, you must call me Baroness.
I can't call you the Baroness. You see, I've never spoken to the Baroness directly.
I think it's Your Excellency. I think that's what you want.
No,
Baroness.
she's not
No,
she's a
Baroness is
baroness.
what I prefer. That is what my friends call me.
Okay,
No, Bill
Baroness.
myself calls me Baroness.
Baroness, can you
No,
do you have a
Bill.
question for us?
Well, I just want to tell you, I've heard some disparaging things about Bill, and he was quite the ladies' man. We called him a cake eater in those days, and you know, I am quite the bear cat. But
You're
Al, I
quite
must
the what?
tell you, bear cat.
Bear cat?
Yes, that's how I am known, Baroness Bear Cat. Bill gave me the icy mitt, and it was quite literal, right in the cheek. But Marcel, well, I had enough notoriety, but Marcel, he wanted more. He wanted the notoriety that I had, and the Armut piece was right up his alley. Oh, pardon me, too much of the giggle water. I'm rather zazzled, you know. I've had too much of the jag juice.
Baroness.
Something about a little too much jag juice is then you don't have to be a blue-nosed Mrs. Grundy. No, that's when there's freedom. No bonus balonus, just the God's honest truth. And remember, I am not off my nuts like some say. Just have a bit of an edge on.
Baroness.
Juice joint.
Baroness.
Yes.
How many cocktails have you had?
Well, you know, at the beginning of our conversation, I was on 6, but now I'm on 8.
Baroness, do you have a question for us?
Well, Al, you did a adequate job with my poem, but it wasn't me. It just wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the lack of the cocktail. I'm not quite certain, but...
How do you know I wasn't drinking when I did that? Baroness, this is such a pleasure to speak with you. I'm not giving you a free book because it would mean you'd have to give us a permanent address to mail it to, and I know you don't have a permanent address.
No.
I could just say Baroness Elsa von Freitag Loringhoven, East Greenwich Village, New York.
Oh, that finds me.
I think actually he lived in the West Greenwich Village. But I think that I'm going to guess that the person who is being the Baroness in this phone call is on the Upper West Side, which is a total dislocation.
You are mistaken. This is not Mandana, although she's a dear friend of mine. In fact, I loaned her my birdcage hat. She was going to celebrate at some sort of shindig, and she wanted to wear that.
Baroness Elsa von Freitag Loringhoven, we're going to give you snaps. I know that in your day it was not the way to do it. Appreciate your call. Please call again.
Well, Al...
You're not going to reveal who you are either. We know who you are, but...
I must get a wiggle on. And advice to don't take any wooden nickels.
Don't take any wooden needles?
Oh,
nickels.
Wooden nickels.
Right. Baroness, the next time we come to New York, we hope that you will come in Baroness garb to our podcast. What do you think? Our webcast?
Oh, certainly. I wish you could see me now. I have quite the outfit on. It's quite lovely.
Okay. Well, coal scuttles for earrings, I'm sure. Thank you, Baroness. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, my dear.
Bye-bye.
Cheerio.
That's the first time that's happened. Now, if Tristan Zara calls, I'm going to be very upset. 215-573-9752. And the next person who calls is going to get a copy of a book that has been edited by a community TA who's also a poet and artist, Ingrid Ruthig, who's Canadian. And this is The Essential Anne Wilkinson. And it was sent to us yesterday by Ingrid. And we're happy to give that book from Ingrid back to you for the next caller. So, Julia, have you looked at the forums? I know they're busy. Is there something you'd like to point out? Or Dave Poplar, did you see something, either of you?
There's a great question from Layla Hughes, who writes, I'm wondering, should we read the poetry of Gertrude Stein in an untraditional manner, just as she writes in an untraditional manner? It's a great question about how the work is asking us to read differently or non-traditionally.
Excellent question. So why don't I ask Erica and Mary just to comment briefly on that. Move the mic real close to you, Mary. So the question is, it's one thing to know that she wrote unusually. Do we have to read unusually?
Oh, definitely. We have to read with our ears.
We have to read with our mouths. We have to read her out loud. We have to read with the dictionary. We have to read backwards to forwards. We have to read not thinking in terms of how the grammar usually works, but taking a look at places where the punctuation should be and isn't, and think about other places where other alternate punctuation marks could have been. We have to think about breath.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is, and it's a lot of fun, and we have to read with a lot of pleasure. I should end up with that. We have to read with a lot of pleasure.
Very cool. Erica, as I turn to you on this question, if you like, add into it a further corollary, which is it good for us to have to reinvent our own reading practice ever?
I think it's always good to reinvent your own reading practice, and one of the things that I think, Sue, is to understand that that is a positive thing, and that rethinking ways that one reads is always good because it teaches you to slow down and pay more attention to the language. And when I read Stein, it's almost like you get to live inside of the text while you're reading it because it's so all-encompassing. And what happens to me as a reader when I do that is I find that I just notice and I think a lot more about the way that individual words are working and what repeats itself and how gerunds are functioning. So that's my take.
In a minute, Jason, I'm giving you a 2-minute warning. I'm going to turn to you for an answer to this question about is it good for us to learn how to read differently? And I'll set it up, right, give you the minute to think about this. I'll set it up by saying something that I've said variously over the years, which is I'm not enough of a archaeoanthropologist thinking a lot about how human beings came to signify, came to talk, communicate, and then came to write, which happened, we think, fairly early in the move of Homo sapiens, the big move toward signifying. We don't know what that language was, but one question would be, how is it that we adopted conventions that brought us up to the 20th century and with some interruptions in reading practices, but not a lot, and then suddenly the 20th century is full, and 21st, full of disruptions of reading practices and alternatives. Is there something quote-unquote natural about all those conventions, and is there something quote-unquote unnatural about our going on and on in this course about how much fun and how much pleasure and how important it is and how maybe healthy it is to disrupt your reading conventions? What's wrong with conventions? And all those questions, and here is Jason going to tell us about why he thinks it's good to disrupt your reading practices. And Lily and I are just like breathing in on this. Here comes Jason.
Let's see. I think that of course it is good to disrupt one's reading practices, and I think that it brings me to Stein. When I was going through all the material in preparation, Stein on the noun really stuck out to me. And the phrase, things once they are named does not go on doing anything to them. And I think that what I take from that and from Stein is that we have to, one opportunity is to think of the noun as something occurring that is in the process of being and becoming, rather than a label to place on something. So we can think of the chair and think of a kind of little drawing in a dictionary of what a chair is, or we can think of something that is in the process of being a chair.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. So that Stein is teaching us that even nouns, even pointing, is a process of becoming rather than a dead, been there, done that identification of a thing in the world. It's really, really brilliant. Yes, I want you to leap in, and I also want you or Julia to see what's going on in Twitter, but because I know you've been monitoring that. Anna?
So I just want to, because I always think of this when we have this week, I think it was 2 years ago now, two ModPos ago, that we actually had a number of poets sitting around that very table talking about.
We had a whole thing on Stein, yes.
did,
Bob Perlman, Rachel Blau-Duplessis, Ron Silliman.
Yeah. So something that Ron Silliman said at that particular roundtable discussion has kind of really like just stuck in my brain ever since he said it. And it was that the poems like this, like Stein poems like this, any other kind of paradigm shifting, groundbreaking poem that we look at in this course, teaches you how to read it as you're reading it.
He said something like, these poems have all inside them, all the instructions and guidance to how to read it, the poem itself, that you need in order to read it. He said it more articulately than that.
And it was amazing the way he said it. So, of course, I encourage you to go back and look at the recording we have of that particular.
It's actually excerpted and it's in the reading list.
No, it's there. So go look at it because it's amazing.
There's also a great comment from Teresa on the discussion forum who says that Stein levels the playing field. When we're forced with something so unusual, we go back to being an early language learner and the struggles with making meaning out of the written language. And then Jill Sharp says that's exactly how it feels. Stein makes us start again as readers of language, makes us forge new tools.
That's a better way of putting what I was struggling to say about early humans. But early humans in a single life encounter linguistic socialization, and there's a moment where you feel the way Jason did or says we should about words that are always in process. When somebody my first word speaking that was more than just mama or milk or something was apple, and when I said apple for the first time, there was a big hullabaloo in the house. I still remember it. He said apple, but I must have felt like it was a process going on of signifying, like I'm actually taking this word and attaching it to a thing, and from then on the apple was dead because and getting back to that first moment of recognition is so important. Tweets. Anna, Julia, any tweets of
Lots
consequence?
Lots of speculation on who the Baroness is.
We know, but we won't say,
Megan Worrell-Lupton says, even in our frustrations with the unconventional, let us read these pieces with pleasure, at least to try. Karen Elenier, close reading in the 21st century is about process, slowing down, thought.
Slowing down. We'll talk more about that later in ModPo, the importance of slowing down.
Yeah.
Reading is generally something you do in a hurry, even if you're in school, ironically. Sorry, Rachel, to disabuse you of this hope that college will be a place where you can finally stop racing along to finish your assignment and do the SATs well. But actually, college is not slowed down enough. Yeah. Julia? More?
Yeah, no, it's not slowed down enough. Freshness is good for reading practices. Vi's joining us for the 4th time, so hello, Vi. Shout out to you on Twitter. Yeah, what else do you see, Anna?
And while Anna's digging out tweets, 215-573-9752, and I'd like to thank Mary for sitting up here and invite Sharon, who came a long way to the table, to join us. Anna, some tweets?
Shannon is saying how much she loves Stein, but how frustrating she finds her as well. Shannon, you're not alone.
This is Shannon Ratliff.
Yep.
Now, I remember last year she found that Stein was helping her brain get back in condition, as I recall. That is the way of thinking through Stein is good exercise.
You bet.
Mark Snyder has a great post on the discussion forum about Stein as music. He reposted something he put on the Hopelessly Lost thread. About reading her aloud and how once he started reading Stein aloud, he started to be able to listen.
Yes, and Mark Snyder did a bunch of work with making his own music based on Stein. That got him started on that. Great. So
I got another great one from
yes,
Mark,
go ahead.
too. It needed infection. Linguistic purity is fascist.
Whoa, who said that?
Mark, of course.
Mark Snyder, yikes, with the radical in North Carolina there. Sharon, now that you have a mic, welcome.
Thank you, Al.
I hope you feel part of the ModPo family.
I do. After 3 years, I do.
And what's it like to be here at the Kelly Writers House?
It's really feels like coming home.
Oh, that's
It
great.
does.
Welcome. And your husband, whom I met, is a wonderful guy. He got this. You just didn't drag him along. He understood how important this trip was.
Oh yeah, he just keeps saying, "I'm so happy you're doing what you're doing." So yeah, he gets
that's
it.
great. Good for him. So what I'm going to do now is play Zach. I'm going to play Gertrude Stein, a little bit of Gertrude Stein, the recording we have and I'm going to ask some people here and in the Google Hangouts just to comment on what it sounds like. And you too, Sharon. Just say anything about the sound, taking that cue from Mark. You ready? Here we go.
If I told him, if Napoleon, if I told him, would he like it? Would he like it if I told him? Now, not now, and now. Now, exactly as kings. Feeling full for it, exactitude as kings. So to beseech you as full as for it, exactly or as kings. Shutters shut and open, so do queens. Shutters shut and shutters, and so shutters shut and shutters, and so shutters, and so shutters shut, and so shutters shut, and shutters, and so shutters shut, and so, and also, and also, and so, and so, and also. Exact resemblance to exact resemblance, the exact resemblance as exact as a resemblance. Exactly as resembling, exactly resembling.
So Sharon,
exactly
just visceral response. What do you think when you hear that sound?
She makes everything so emphatic, and I actually like it. I like it when she reads her work.
Mm. That's cool. Julia, what do you do with the music, with the sound?
Can I just ask, you like it better when she reads it?
Yes, better than me reading it on the page. I like it when she reads her
There's
work.
something in her voice that shapes it for us on the page. That happens for me.
Happens for you too, Lily?
I think that someone actually asked me in my office hours this morning if there was something I thought people might overlook by accident this week. Then I actually said that listening to this recording was something I hoped people didn't overlook. Because for me, I think like when I'm faced with a really difficult text, the last thing I think of doing is reading it out loud because you're just frustrated and whatever. But this proves to me that it can be super helpful to read things out loud or listen to them be read out loud to you because you just hear different rhythms or repetitions that are hard. It's actually the device of repetition is hard to pick up on if you're just reading it on the page because most people don't read to themselves by reading it out loud in a voice in their own head. So,
Lily, what's the difference between your eyes seeing repeated or parallelistic words on a page, similarities, and on the other hand, saying it or having it said to you and hearing it? What's the difference in seeing repetition and hearing repetition?
I think that both are important to appreciate the device of repetition, but when you hear it out loud, it's kind of that cliched effect now maybe of like you look at yourself in the mirror saying something over and over again, or you say something over and over again, and you start to dissociate the meaning of that word from the way that it sounds. So I think that's really hard to reproduce that effect by physically reading because your brain just really knows what to do with the way that word looks on the page and will probably continue to read it as that word.
Right.
More than your ear will continue to interpret the same word over and over again as the thing it means.
Yeah, really well put. I think we've been trained, the eye has been trained to sometimes skip or move fast when we've already got something so the repetition could be skipped because you figure, oh, I'll just follow the parallelism and get where I'm going to go. Yeah. Plus, the ear is probably better at hearing distinctions than the eye. I'm not sure that that's true, but I think it's true in my experience of reading Stein.
Yeah, and it also depends on what the word is. Like, in this case, if I told him there are a couple, I'm blanking now, but, there are some words that are homonyms, is that the word I want, that sound the same, but they're different
homonyms.
Words. Homonyms, yeah, I always get those confused. If you're reading them, there's no possible chance of, or it's a lot harder to confuse. And Stein does a lot of work, I think, with bringing in homonyms playfully with the writing, but it's really hard to force your brain to think, like if you see the word two, think of it as the number two and the word TO and the word TOO all at the same time. Whereas when you hear them repeated, it's really easy to confuse and think of the multiple senses of that word at once.
Well put. I want to turn to Max McKenna on this topic, and then we'll move on to another topic. Max, say anything about the sound. You just listened to Gertrude Stein for the nth time, and what's your impression?
I like to think of it these days as a sort of like proto-glitch poem. It reminds me, especially today, of the Tracy Morris poem to come in week 10. That's a little preview for those of you who are not already familiar with that poem. But I know we've been calling it in the past the sort of impressionist painting through sound, but I like to think of it as like a tape skipping or a record skipping. And I know that that sort of is anachronistic because that predates a lot of those technologies, or at least like the familiarity with those technologies. But I don't know, it's kind of fun to think of it as something that's very glitchy, as something that's malfunctioning, which I think is another way of it trying to tell us how to read it, or how to listen to it, at least in this case, right? Like things are malfunctioning, things are breaking down, things are not working as they're supposed to. So what do we do with that? How do we understand that?
Well put. And there is a poem this week, a prose poem this week, where the story is about a malfunction which causes an accident. And Stein begins in that piece, Let Us Describe, with a relatively conventional narrative, even though there's got Steinian repetition in it. But then she ends with the kind of malfunctioning you're talking about, and we get the strategies of representation match the horrible accidental loss that's memorialized in that prose poem. So there's a great example of form and content working together, right? How you say what you say is as important as what you say. If you simply say, my friends were in a car accident, that doesn't convey the glitchiness and the mechanical breakdown that Max was describing in a way that's commensurate with the feeling of loss and accident. That horrible, traumatic feeling of loss needs to find some commensurate way, and that way is the how of that poem, of that prose poem. So it's kind of a quote-unquote easy Stein poem, but I think we like to use it as a touchstone for the main point of this course. Uh-oh, I just painted myself into a corner. CJs are taking notes like, I know what the main point of the course is, because it is a takeaway. I mean, it is a takeaway. The language that you use as sound, as music, as form, as painting, as self-expression needs to be commensurate with the thing that it tells, the story it tells as content. And in a way, all you need is the form of the piece of writing to tell you the entire story. This is not exclusive. We're not saying that writing that's more focused on content than form is illegitimate. We're just taking this time in this 10 weeks to study the other kind of stuff because it's not as often recognized, not as often covered, certainly in middle school and high school. We have someone on the phone. Yes, please,
Just
Julia.
a few quick tweets. So Vi says poetry isn't speed reading. Shannon Ratliff says reading aloud, even in my stinted voice, Stein becomes fractal geometry, beautiful patterns. And then Therese Pope says something that ties in really well with what you were just saying, Al. As a copywriter, this is how I've seen Stein's process. She punches the language, topples it down, and then builds it back up again.
Make it new.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's her version of make it new. Anna, who do we have on the phone?
We have our resident expert Steiny Road poet. It's Karen Elenier.
Oh, Karen's on the phone. Hello, Karen.
Hello, Al.
Chris, can we bring Karen's voice up? Karen, speak nice and loudly. That'll help us.
Okay, I'm speaking loud. Can you hear me?
Yes. Are you in Maryland?
I am.
Okay.
I am
Hello.
in Maryland.
So you've been thinking about Stein for many, many, many years. Does Stein get old? Does Stein get tired? Are you tired of Stein?
Never.
Why
There's
not?
no opportunity for that. There's so much to learn. I mean, because you have to go word by word to uncover the new things about Stein. So there's no opportunity. She wrote every night, and there's so many words. I was just thinking that, you know, there's the sub-poem in Objects called a piano, you know, in tender buttons. If the speed is open, if the color is careless, if the selection of a strong scent is not awkward, you know, if the button holder is held by all the waving color, and there is no color, not any color. I mean, you know, who can get tired of this? Yes. And I mean, you know, this, point to your cup.
Karen, yeah, I don't have a cup. Yes, I do. This. Or, just to anticipate next week.
Yes.
This.
So anyway,
ribbit. Don't run over this guy with your lawnmower. Karen, I have a question for you.
Okay.
You called and wanted to ask a question. Now I'm asking a question of you. When avatars and proponents of Steinian writing get enthusiastic, there is sometimes resistance and counter-argument. We don't see it a lot, but it's understandable, right? So if somebody says, how could you get into this stuff? It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsense. Or why resist representation? What's wrong with representation? Or it's just art for its own sake, or whatever the counter-argument is. Where do you begin? Don't take us through the entire counter-argument because that's years of work, but where do you begin to encourage someone to give it a try or to refute or try to refute their concerns?
Well, I think a good place to begin is to read the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas.
And who wrote that?
Of course, it was Gertrude Stein. And so, you know, Gertrude Stein is full of humor and fun things to experience. So I say, if you don't know much about Stein, start there and have some fun with Gertrude Stein, who got everybody in the literary community mad at her with that book.
Why?
Her brother, because they felt that, you know, she was fabricating things. And indeed, she was. She was making up all kinds of stories, but they had an edge of truth to them.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And so, you know, start there and have some fun. You need to have fun with Stein, and then you can inch your way in to the words that she uses. And they're simple words. I love looking at the roots of words. That's what you need to love, is looking at the roots of words.
Yes. Water raining. Water astonishing and difficult altogether makes a meadow and a stroke. There's nothing really hard about the words individually, and yet we could talk hours about that, talk about slow reading. Karen, thank you for calling. Now, I would like to send you a copy of Ingrid's selection of Anne Wilkinson. So you can communicate with Anna later about your mailing address. I think we may have it anyway, to send this to you. From one community TA to another.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to the book. And I'm
Great.
also looking forward to starting up news discussions of Tender Buttons in the forum. So look for
Great.
them there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen, as always, for calling, and thank you for your hard work on behalf of the ModPo community. So Karen's going to hang up 215-573-9752. What I'd like to do is ask a few others here to say something about the resistance to Stein. We don't see a ton of it, but when we do, it makes a lot of sense. It's something we have to really grapple with as colleagues and teacher guiders. So let's talk about that. And while we're doing this, I want to say goodbye to Sharon. That is goodbye in the sense of being at the table, and thank you again. You want to say anything about your ModPo experience before you lose the mic?
Just that it's been one of the best experiences in my life, probably.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's hear it for Sharon for making this big trip. And Andrea, I wonder if you want to come on up here. Okay, so I'm going to ask Molly and I don't know who else. Dave maybe wants to say something. A response to resistance to Stein. You know, what do you say, Molly? What's your approach to that?
I can sympathize with it. I think it took me the first 2 years of coming through this course to get over my own resistance. But
yeah, how did you get over it?
Re-immersion, over and over. I think that there's a reaction to anything that feels unfamiliar. You know, Stein is almost an other. She's challenging our traditional understanding of what poetry should look like, and so in order to get over that, we have to to put ourselves in a different frame of mind and read it in a different way. We can't read it from left to right and down the page. You have to go sort of from all different angles the way that she does.
There's a poem at the end of week 4. It's kind of a trick poem and a throwaway poem by John Peel Bishop, a sonnet, which makes very explicit this encouragement to read differently. It's the famously She Descended, Fuck You Half-Ass poem, which is an acronym going. Is that what we call it, an acronym? No.
Acrostic.
Acrostic, sorry. An acrostic going down, and that's sort of the obvious, tricky, snappy, unforgettable parlor game, do it once and don't do it again. So it's very different from Stein in that sense. But it teaches us what? Dave, I am coming to you on the resistance question, but I wonder, Andrea, are you familiar enough with the Fuck You Half-Ass poem? And why is that good to have? Should we get rid of it from ModPo? It's kind of trivial, obviously.
It does strike me as sort of very different from everything else on the syllabus, and it does kind of make its point in a very inelegant way as opposed to some of the other things that we study. But I also think that it's in keeping with a lot of the modernist poets in that it is a very abrupt, kind of very pointed commentary.
And what does it teach you the first time? It doesn't teach you it after that, but it teaches you the first time.
To read things differently, that you have to look at things differently, that the old way of doing things is not going to work. It's not enough.
Lily, why do you think it's the case that young people would generally see that trick more readily than older people? I'm being very loose in my use of young because I wouldn't want to be known as someone who showed middle school kids a poem that says "fuck you half-ass." But over the years I've used that for 30 plus years variously, and people who are more settled, older, etc., more experienced, tend to take longer to get it. Is there any message to be drawn from that? And if not, that's fine. You can say anything else.
I guess you basically said it, that like if you're settled as an older person, maybe you're also settled in your reading practice, whereas if you're closer to the age of having learned to read literally, maybe you're more interested in or able to imagine a different way of reading.
There's another piece in ModPo Plus. It's a Marcel Duchamp eye chart. He stole or borrowed an eye chart that's actually in Cyrillic, partly in Cyrillic, so it's really a weird eye chart from Paris. And I urge you, if you have a few extra minutes, I know you don't have a few extra minutes, but go over to ModPo Plus and look at it. And what it's doing is similar to this famously She Descended John Peel Bishop sonnet, which is you look at the eye chart and you say to yourself, I don't know what I'm seeing. And so you're thinking, wait a minute, it's an oculist. The oculist doesn't care what the eye chart spells out. The oculist is testing my vision. Maybe I need to read as if I'm looking, as if I'm identifying what I'm seeing. And maybe the Fuck You Half-Ass poem is about learning to see art, not read. See. Use your eyes. So I think it's rather instructive to say to our students. I do this in the in-person version of ModPo English 88. I say as they're looking at it, Lily remembers, and Anna, as they're looking at it, I'm saying, look with your eyes, look, don't read, look. And I think that's a really great encouragement that this week we get from Gertrude Stein. Dave Poplar, I promised that I would ask you about resistance, and maybe you should expand it more broadly to resistance to experimental, how-centered poetry generally. Say anything you like, and then we're going to go to the phone caller. Anna Strong has a phone caller. So, Dave?
Well, I think there's something especially interesting when talking about resistance to Stein's poetry, because to me Stein's poetry really embodies a lot of resistance. Just listening again to the recording of Stein reading, there's something really confident and reassuring about the way she presents it, but at the same time there's something really awkward and uncomfortable about listening to language being used in that way. We're totally not used to language being used in that way at all. I would encourage people to look at the video of the dance troupe performing a modern dance to Let Us Describe, or to Would You Like It If I Told Him? I think that, for me, really crystallized the point about communication being external to the thing. There are physical movements representing these words, and it makes you think about these things being used completely differently than you're used to. So it's something that we're very resistant to because it's nothing we've dealt with before. But it's embodied in the poem, and it's just something she's helping us break down. So
follow-ups there, Dave. One is, can you intuit or deduce what the Nederland dance troupe did in making that poem a dance piece? What did they do? What do you imagine they did to choreograph it?
You mean specifically to make
yes, you're going to guess. You don't know, but what would you guess happened?
Well, they're just trying to put the sounds into motion, and through that it becomes a new form of communication. It paints a picture using different types of communication than we're ever used to.
Well, but and more specifically, we would have to guess that they looked at the word, and every time she said Napoleon, they had a move, a body position.
Right. It was representational in that sense. Yeah, it was like
said, told him. So they actually translated phrases, repeated phrases, into body movements.
Which is interesting because then that movement becomes akin to a word, becomes akin to a representation, but it's the word, the movement is used as communication that we're just not used to.
That's right. That's right. And so there's never resistance to dance of this sort. There's very little resistance anymore to painting of this sort. There's almost no resistance to music of this sort because nobody expects music to refer. Instrumental music. Music without words. There's tons of resistance to writing that does this because writing, we're used to writing, thinking of writing as a utility. We're not used to thinking of performed concert music as a utility. So we're already in the aesthetic frame of mind. Whereas when we're using language, we get all upset because we think of language as actually having utility that people are willingly giving up when they do this kind of work. So the dance is really healthy for that. Thank you, Dave. Anna, who do we have on the phone?
On the phone, we have Raymond calling from New York City.
Great.
And he wants to talk about Stein.
Okay. So, Raymond, good morning.
Yes. Good morning, Al. And firstly, I wanted to start off by saying I've enjoyed listening and watching ModPo, and it's been a balm for my traumatic experience of trying to study poetry in school some years ago. And
did you say traumatic experience studying poetry in school?
Yeah, like trauma.
Why was that, Raymond? Can you say briefly?
Yeah, and I wanted to say that I'm sorry that I missed you when you were at Poet's House. I had signed up and I just wasn't able to make it.
That's okay. That's okay.
We'll catch you next time around.
Please do.
I was one of two African American students in a class with probably all Euro-American men, and myself and an African American woman were the only ones in there. And the instructor, I think, saw us as furniture or perhaps unboxed bookshelves or something, and pretty much ignored us for the most part. And then I had a manifesto. I read a manifesto, and then we left the class, and I went into theater, and I don't know where the other student went, but anyway, it was I think somewhat traumatic. And
yeah, it sounds it. And what's interesting, what's interesting,
but it's colored my experience.
Yeah, what's interesting about that story, insofar as you were able to convey it briefly there, was the move from a poetry class into theater, where theater would allow you to be more performative, more expressive, presumably. Well, I'm sorry that you had a traumatic experience. Was that in New York City?
No. That was on the left coast, the northwest.
Okay. But I'm glad that you found ModPo all these years later, and I guess what you're saying is that you're back. It's a little less traumatic, or maybe a lot less traumatic.
Oh, you guys are doing a great job. I think you personally, I'm not a groupie or anything, but I think you do a wonderful job of working at being inclusive, and so I think that's
great,
beautiful situation that you created.
Thank you.
There.
Well,
Sure.
whenever we get praise like this, everybody on the team, we're gratified and honored by it. Believe me. And I hope that you'll get on a bus or train and come down to the Writers' House at some point and hang out here with us. You're welcome.
Oh,
always.
absolutely, absolutely.
Great. All right. So do you have
Yeah, I had a comment about Stein because one of my teachers out in Oakland was a big Stein fan, and we read it. And she's a voice and acting training teacher, and she's a big Steinomaniac. And on a personal note, I feel Stein, kinesthetically in my body. I'm a big Mary Baraka, Langston Hughes, Sterling Brown man. But with Stein, I feel Stein's work like I feel Coltrane's music. And that's my comment.
Yeah, that's great. Raymond, would you be willing to stay on the line? We can get some comments and then come back to you at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. So,
thank you.
folks in the Google Hangouts or anybody here at the table, nod to me if you think you have something to say. Either to acknowledge or affirm Raymond's feeling that the rhythm of speech and that the seeming improvisation of Stein, it makes sense for him to hear Coltrane there or hear a connection or Baraka. Or maybe something about what's going to happen later in ModPo that will itself affirm Raymond's feeling that we're moving in that direction. So, any comments about that? Julia, do you want to say something about the relationship between improvisation and where modern and contemporary poetry goes, and the importance of that, or the importance of body rhythm and so forth?
Well, I'll say something about the recording that we just listened to, and we listened to a lot of recordings in ModPo, and one of the things we think about is how every recording or every performance or reading of a poem is kind of an interpretive act, so that you find fine differences in the text, but you also find different kinds of inflection. And so what I really love about what Ray's saying about feeling Stein kinesthetically is that you can feel it, differently kinesthetically. Like every time you hear it, every time you read it aloud, every time you hear someone else read it or perform it in a different medium. So it becomes like a living thing more than just a textual thing.
Great. Let's go to Anna, and then would you bring the mic up to Michael? So, Anna?
I would add also that we've kind of, like you said before, Al, that there's very little resistance to Stein's kind of experimentation in other arts like music and painting, but we're still getting it in words. I would say that when people first heard jazz, it was a radical experiment too, right? There was this element of dissonance and discord and syncopation that that was itself kind of a radical move, a radical experiment with the way that with some kind of accepted conventions of hearing and conventions of listening, that I think it's totally not unreasonable to see Stein as playing on some of that same kind of experimentation.
Yeah. And while the mic is getting up to Michael, I'll say that when I was studying the Cold War response to modern poetry, there was a movement, we'll just call it formally conservative or culturally conservative movement, to roll back innovations. The attack on Stein was consonant with the attack on syncopation particularly. There was a whole anti-communist screed against syncopation as the beginning of the end for young people, because it would teach them to move their bodies in obscene ways. And Stein was lumped into that. So there's a connection I never thought, Raymond, that I would make. And I'll just throw out a little anticipation of we're doing Baraka's response to County Cullen's incident later in the course, I think during the Beat Week maybe.
Yeah, and also How You Sound is on.
How You Sound is in there. How You Sound is really important, Baraka. But his poem Incident is a Steinian poem. His poem Incident, it uses repetition to mess up what we understand about a crime, a violent crime that Baraka is reporting, a shooting actually, where he makes it unclear by using Steinian repetition who the shooter was and who's being shot, so that the whole agency of violence the race is not explicit in that poem. Seemingly, this is racially inflected, this killing, and so he uses Steinian modernism in order to confuse us, so that we have to think, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I've seen. How can we solve the crime, etc. So there's a real connection between Baraka and Stein at that point. Michael.
Well, I think for me, Stein was an acquired taste. There's such a hump to get over, and once I got over it, I started enjoying it. And it's one of the few poets or poems that I like reading aloud. I like to read, rather than watch the videos. If there's a transcript, I prefer that. But for Stein, it has to be the hearing it. I don't even want to read it anymore.
Wow, interesting.
I just like to listen, and it's a whole different thing. And the one thing that I want to say that came up when Ray was talking, and the way that Stein reads it, it's more about theater and performance than it is about real life. You know, we've had poets where, who was one of the poets, we didn't even know that he was reading his poetry. It was just like talking to us, and then you realize, oh, that's the poem. And with Stein, it's not that. It's actually a performance, and it's theater.
Yeah.
At least that's the way it struck me.
Yeah, it's very exciting and gratifying. Raymond, we're going to come back to you in just a second. It's very exciting and gratifying to hear you say, Michael, that Gertrude Stein, who's known primarily on the page, right, Julia?
Yeah.
And the recordings, she didn't really make a lot of recordings. The recordings are sort of archival stuff that we've figured out and put up on Penn Sound. And probably one of the proudest things that I feel about being a co-director of Penn Sound is the Stein stuff, because it means people are apprehending Stein in the way you describe. And it just wasn't, when I was first studying Stein, that was not available, I can assure you. Raymond, are you still with us?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to put on a final word on this topic or say anything further?
I'm just really enjoying it. That's the key thing. And secondly, I will just say something that occurred to me this morning in thinking about the assignments. You know, I'm having I'm doing a lot of things. You know, life intervenes, and so
yes, sure.
In terms of trying to keep up, my God, you know, and so there is hope, because I do hear people saying this is my third year, and so perhaps that'll be my lot as well. But the thing that I thought about this morning was, you know, you think about who poets are reading, and that's, you know, a very valid concern. But also, I would consider, who are they listening to? You know, I mean, who might she have been listening to on her Victrola or her iPod or not abusing, but on whatever device she had.
Yeah.
So that's the final thing I'd like to say.
Raymond, before you hang up, thank you for those comments and for the question.
Sure.
In response to your, I think you said your fate or whatever it is, that inevitably you'll be with us for a few years. That's the whole idea of this massive open online course, is not to have it so that people have busy lives, and you could easily do 15 hours a week on ModPo or more. I met someone who's doing 20 hours a week. You know, we really hoped it would be designed for 6 to 8 hours, but we're recognizing that it's more. So we've set it up so that you can stay with us and come back. So don't feel guilty about not being able to do every week fully. Do what you can and then stay with us. We'd really like that, and we want you to feel like you're part of the Kelly Writers House community too. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raymond. Thanks for. By the way, Raymond. By the way, don't hang up. Give Anna offline or something your address, because I have a book by Kevin Young I'd like to send you. I was going to give this out and I almost forgot. It's called Book of Hours, and we'd be happy to send that to you. And Anna, what you wanted this book? You're giving me a face. Okay. Well, yeah. Sorry. Raymond, you're gonna have to share it with her. So what she's gonna do? She's gonna do a little magic and get you on the phone and get your address, so thousands of people don't hear your address. So, thanks Raymond. Thanks. Take care. All right. Okay, so we're not going to take another call. We're going to wrap up. We're going to get some final words, and then I have a shout-out or two at the end. So everybody, including Andrea, final words on the Stein Week, on Week 4. Plan on saying anything at all. It looks like Max had to go to class, but everybody else is with us. Jason, you too. Anna, when she's off the phone. So Julia, you've taught this stuff. You have a lot to say. What would you like ModPoers to know?
Well, I'm actually going to start with a question from the discussion forum that Mandana posted for Rennie Fulton from Facebook about the emotional content of Stein's poetry in prose. And this person wrote, reading them bumps up against my culture and linguistic indoctrination, but when I listen it becomes more accessible as poetry, and kind of wondering about the emotional content. So I guess I want to say that teaching Stein and reading Stein has taught me to locate emotion in strange places, in places that look more like crisp and sculptural and juxtaposed than I thought they should. And there's a tremendous amount of tenderness towards the object in something like Tender Buttons that I think it can really transport us.
And tenderness has an emotive connotation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to ask Lily, and then Carlos, and then Dave, Erica, and Molly, and then we'll go to Andrea and Anna and Jason. Lily, final thoughts on this? Anything to add?
I guess actually, I mean, I like the Stein week. It's always refreshing for me after Williams week to get back to some feminine points of view with Stein and also with the Baroness, whom I love a lot. But I kind of wanted to address Raymond, actually. I know he's not on the phone anymore, but just kind of want to say thank you for Raymond and for other people who have had traumatic or bad classroom experiences with poetry to giving us the benefit of the doubt and trying out ModPo, because I know that's really difficult if you've had a bad classroom experience or a teacher who always, invalidated your point of view, to submit yourself to the sort of wisdom of crowds, which seems probably very scary. So I want to say thanks to Raymond and other people who are giving poetry a try again.
Beautiful, thank you. Carlos, final thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is my first time reading Stein, and what I really appreciated in reading her was sort of seeing where a lot of the things that I recognize in poems that I read of people my age, other poets, this kind of blending of textual language into their poems, and seeing where maybe that started happening. This use of a new language in poems, a new way of using words that I think gets incorporated a lot today in poems. And then one final thing, not about Stein, but again to Ray. I'm not sure if he's still listening, but when he was describing, or when you were describing your interest in music and also responding to Stein in a kind of musical way, made me think of maybe you might like Terrence Hayes. He's a poet writing right now. And I really like his stuff, and he's very much influenced by modern music, R&B, rap, jazz. Anyway, you might check him out.
And he's got a new book out in 2015.
Yeah.
Dave thank you, Carlos. Dave Poplar, final thoughts?
Just real quickly, there's a comment in the forums by Ina Schroeder-Zeters about Stein being translated. She asks if Stein has ever been translated, because maybe the puns that she does in English wouldn't work in another language. And I think that's such a great concept, because it calls such attention to the fact that that's what she's talking about. There's these connotations with language. There's these things that wouldn't work in other languages, and we just take these things for granted. They go under the surface, but that crystallizes it.
Yeah, thank you. Well put, Dave. And thank you, Ina, for posting that point. Erica Kaufman.
I guess for my final words, I want to make a little bit of a pitch for encouraging people to teach Gertrude Stein. I think that because of everything that we've been talking about, she's somebody that's invaluable for all classrooms. Gertrude Stein teaches us how to work with students to close read, and she teaches students how to remember that writing is really fun and learn how to love language again.
Very well put, and a good pitch. Molly O'Neill? She's...
sorry, guys.
That's all right.
I'm struggling.
Delete your mute.
Yeah, we have a little excerpt from Poetry and Grammar from Stein that reads, nouns are the name of anything, and just naming names is all right when you want to call a roll, but is it good for anything else? And that's what I like about Stein, is that she wants to do more, and she's asking more of us in order to do more with the language, and it's a really nice next step from where we've been with poetry.
Nice. She wants more. Jason and then Anna.
Yeah, and I think not only to think of music and art, I think we think of Stein being surrounded by especially painters who she is in dialogue with. But I think it's important to remember that she's also a scientist, a biologist, which she was originally trained as. And she's in the period of time after Darwin, and when a member of a species is no longer identical to each other member of the same species. So when we have that each member of a species has the potential to mutate and become different. And I think that when we get to exact resemblance, that part of the joy of Steinian repetition is that no instance of a word is the same as any other instance of a word. And so for what Dave was saying about translation is, I think Stein would welcome translation. The exact resemblance to exact resemblance is to exact as a verb, and it's an adjective, and there is no, of course, exact resemblance. Even identical twins do not exactly resemble each other. And the fantasy of language's capacity for the dream of exact resemblance is a kind of broken dream that Stein happily breaks down for us into something with much greater potential.
Fantastic. Yes, it is just that, a fantasy, and it needs to be exposed as such. Anna Strong, and then Andrea, final words.
I love that, just thinking about language and poetry as having like this potential energy that gets stunted by that exact resemblance. So like down with exact resemblance. I guess I want to say for my final word to Victoria, who was tweeting at us. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to address your question. She was asking us to go more into the how and the what of poetry. I guess to her I would say, and to anyone else who's still wondering about that, hold that thought. We're going to talk about it literally every single week with every single poem that we do. And also that I have office hours right after this if you want to come hang out.
Good pitch. I like the way you got that pitch in there. Andrea Buonacontro. Did I do that right?
Pretty close.
Wow.
Bonin Contro.
Bonin
Bonin
Contro.
Contro. Yep.
Thank you, Andrea.
Sure. I have two things. One, I love week 5. I love this week. And one of the things that I always think about this week is that we turn from being collaborators with the poets into being co-conspirators with the poets in this week. And I mean that sometimes it's going to feel like you're working a lot harder, that you're putting more into it than the text might seem to require. But I want to just assure people that you're not, and that what you'll get back from it by putting that extra effort in and to kind of co-conspire to make meaning out of these things is so worth it. So go with that feeling and kind of use that playfulness also of being a co-conspirator and make it into something. And then the second thing is I wanted to get kind of into this week really brings out for me the meta of ModPo, which is this idea that we can look at something that seems very ambiguous, that seems very uncertain, and we can go into it collaboratively and know that even though we might not get to a definitive answer, that we'll get closer to something together than we would individually. So this week just kind of brings that to the forefront for me, and I think that's kind of the theme of ModPo for me, the
That's
meta
really
of
great.
ModPo.
Yes, so getting answers to question. It's not a matter of not getting answers to question. It's being on a spectrum toward which the end of that spectrum is an answer that's not forthcoming, but you can move along the spectrum toward what might be an answer. Yes, what Wallace Stevens called a fiction that will suffice for the moment. 3 shout-outs. 3 shout-outs. One is to the people of the Kelly Writers House, who have just put out this thing, which is our Writers House Annual. And if you're here at the Writers House, pick up a copy. If you really must have one, just somehow communicate with me, and I'll make sure that we figure out a way to mail it to you. And just a couple of things to point out here that is just a way of ballyhooing some things at the Writers House. There's a 2-page spread on our efforts to recruit. Andrea, pay attention. Is it Andrea? Rachel, sorry. Rachel, pay attention. To recruit students who are interested in coming to Penn because they're interested in writing and writers and communities of writers, and we do our own outreach. So any high school students out there who are interested, work with your teachers, and maybe Julia and Erica and the teaching fellows can help you with that, or work directly with us. We'll put you in touch. Lily and I could put you in touch with Jamie Lee Jocelyn, who works with students who want to come to Penn and hang out at the Writers House. And the other thing I'm really pleased to say, because I'm surrounded on my right and left by the co-teachers of the Kelly Writers House Fellows seminar last year, and this spread celebrates the great achievement of that. Last year, you can see there our own Julia Block and Dorothy Allison, and Ann Waldman is up there with her hands out, and of course she's a ModPo poet. And we hope that you'll tune in the spring to Writers House Fellows and get to know us that way. The second shout-out is to the people at Columbia's Teachers College who invited me to talk about ModPo. I was definitely a minority voice there, and I created, I think it was 6 adages, and I'll just tell you what they are. Not going to explain them, but you already know, and this kind of threw everybody for a loop. They're sort of ready to consolidate the profit-making, consolidating machine MOOC, the automated MOOC that does automated grading and so forth. And I was there to say the opposite, and the 6 points are: 1, beware the course fetish. 2, pedagogy's plural. 3, the end of the lecture really should be the end of the lecture. 4, form is only an extension of content, and this applies to the course. I like that. Someday we'll talk more about that. The course itself can't defy the material, the open-ended, interesting material. That you can't have open-ended, interesting material and then have a course which shoves it down your throat through, lectures and other tyrannical forms. And then the failure problem is a complete red herring. There's a whole issue of people who drop out of MOOCs, that somehow they failed. Most of the ModPo people drop out at one point or don't finish the whatever. And they're not failures. And finally, let's not lose sight of what's actually innovative about MOOCs. What's actually innovative about MOOCs is not the delivery mechanism and not the content, but the ways in which learning communities of unprecedented size and diversity can come together improvisationally and personally and non-automatedly to produce interesting responses to difficult material. And finally, thirdly, a recommendation and a shout-out, make sure that you go to Cheesy Thank You. Cheesy Thank You is the name of a thread. It was created by Bessiana Vati, who is in Albania, and she's been struggling with all kinds of problems in her life, which you can read about. She was very forthright about them. And she's taken a leave of absence from school, and she wrote this piece explaining that and how good ModPo is. There have been probably 100 responses to her, including other people who experienced ModPo during times in their life when they were struggling. Here's the final paragraph of what Bessiana said, and I think the response to Bessiana from the ModPo community has been very helpful to her, and she's really enjoying it. And this is what she wrote. And with this, we'll sign off. Thank you to CJ, Sharon, especially Sharon coming all this way, Andrea, always, Mary, Rachel, Michael, Anna, Lily, Carlos, Dave, Erica, Molly, and Max when he was here, of course, Julia, and Chris and Zach. Holy cow. Nobody does this. New York was impossible. I mean, I cannot believe how you did that. It was perfect. So thank you to all. And we're going to sign off with Bessiana's final words in a line from Stein. She writes, I wake up in the morning excited and looking forward to this course, to read new poetry, to write the assignments, to hone my writing and reading skills. And while I'm still not at the level I was before my illness kicked in, I noticed an improvement with my articulation already, and I am hopeful in the ways in which this course will aid me in my weeks to come. So thank you again. Please don't puke when I say this, but this class is a better medicine for me than medications and psychotherapy. And we close with Gertrude Stein in response to Bessiana. The sudden spoon is the same as in no size. The sudden spoon is the wound in the decision. So here's to your sudden spoons this week, and we will see you during the amazing and remarkably diverse week 5. Thank you for tuning in or for watching this as a recording, and we're signing off from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thank you all.